The sun was setting over the vast expanse of the western frontier, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson. A lone rider sat atop his horse on the edge of a narrow creek, the water flowing gently beneath the fading light. The man, clad in a weathered cowboy hat and dusty boots, urged his steed forward with a firm tug on the reins. But the horse refused to budge, its hooves digging into the soft earth as if rooted to the spot. "Come on, boy," the rider whispered, his voice tinged with frustration. He leaned forward, patting the animal's neck in an attempt to soothe it. "It's just a little creek. What's got you so spooked?" But the horse would not move. Its ears flickered nervously, and its eyes darted toward the water, as though something unseen lurked beneath the surface. The rider sighed, glancing around at the desolate landscape that stretched endlessly in every direction. The air was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves carried by the breeze. It was quiet, too quiet. Little did he know, this moment marked the beginning of a tale that would haunt him for years to come. As the minutes ticked by, the rider dismounted, his boots crunching against the gravelly ground. He approached the creek cautiously, peering into the water to see what might have unnerved his loyal companion. At first glance, there appeared to be nothing out of the ordinary. The stream flowed peacefully, reflecting the last remnants of daylight, like a shimmering mirror. Yet, deep down, the man felt an inexplicable unease creeping into his chest. Something wasn't right. He knelt beside the water, dipping his fingers into its cool embrace. As he did so, a faint ripple caught his eye, a disturbance moving downstream. His breath hitched as he squinted through the twilight, trying to make sense of what he saw. At first, it looked like debris, a branch or perhaps a log, but as it drew closer, the shape became clearer. Unbelievable as it seemed, it was no ordinary piece of driftwood. "What in heaven's name?" the man murmured, his voice barely audible above the sound of the rushing water. It was a body. A chill ran down his spine as realization dawned upon him. The horse hadn't been afraid of the creek itself. It had sensed the presence of death floating silently within its depths. With trembling hands, the rider stood up and called out to his steed, who now seemed even more agitated. Together, they watched as the lifeless form drifted closer, eventually catching on a jagged rock protruding from the water. Summoning all his courage, the man waded into the shallow creek, the icy water soaking his trousers up to his knees. Reaching the body, he hesitated before turning it over. The face revealed was pale and gaunt, streaked with mud and blood. It was unmistakably the remains of a woman, her once vibrant hair matted and tangled. Her eyes were closed, but her lips were parted slightly, as if she had tried to scream in her final moments. The rider staggered back, nearly losing his footing in the water. "Who are you?" he whispered, though he knew the question was futile. Whoever she was, she had met a tragic end, and her story remained buried somewhere in the wilderness. Days turned into weeks as the mystery of the woman haunted the small town of Blackwater Crossing. Word spread quickly among the townsfolk, each person offering their own theories about who she might have been and how she came to rest in the creek. Some believed she was a runaway bride, fleeing from a forced marriage only to meet her doom. Others speculated that she was part of a traveling wagon train ambushed by bandits. Still others whispered darker tales of revenge or betrayal. Among those drawn into the enigma was Sheriff Thomas Hale, a grizzled lawman whose piercing gaze could intimidate even the toughest outlaws. Known for his unwavering sense of justice, Hale took it upon himself to uncover the truth behind the mysterious corpse. Alongside him was Deputy Clara Monroe, a sharp-witted young woman with a knack for solving puzzles. Together, they scoured the area surrounding the creek, searching for any clues that might lead them to answers. Their investigation led them to a nearby ranch owned by the Whitmore family, one of the wealthiest and most influential clans in the region. The Whitmores were known for their cattle operations, which spanned miles of open plains. However, rumors swirled about their ruthless business practices, suggesting they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone standing in their way. Sheriff Hale rode to the Whitmore ranch accompanied by Deputy Monroe, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they approached the sprawling property. The ranch house loomed ahead, a grand structure with wide verandas and towering columns. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, mingling with the scent of freshly cut hay wafting through the air. They were greeted at the gate by Mr. Whitmore himself, a tall man with broad shoulders and a stern expression etched onto his face. "Sheriff," he said curtly, tipping his hat in acknowledgement, "what brings you to my doorstep?" Hale dismounted, his boots thudding against the wooden planks of the porch. "We're looking into the matter of the body found in the creek," he explained, his tone measured yet firm. "There's reason to believe your family might know something about it." Whitmore stiffened, his jaw tightening. "My family? I assure you, we've had nothing to do with whatever tragedy befell that poor soul." But his words lacked conviction, and both Hale and Monroe noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes. Despite his denials, the sheriff insisted on speaking with the entire Whitmore household. Inside the ranch house, they encountered Mrs. Whitmore, a fragile woman with hollow cheeks and dark circles under her eyes. She clutched a handkerchief to her mouth, her sobs barely contained as she listened to the description of the deceased. "No," she choked out, shaking her head vigorously. "It can't be. It can't possibly be." Her reaction did not go unnoticed. Hale pressed further, asking whether she recognized the woman from the creek. Reluctantly, Mrs. Whitmore admitted that the victim bore a striking resemblance to someone who had once worked for the Whitmore family, a servant named Abigail. Abigail had vanished without a trace several months prior, leaving behind only a single note scribbled hastily on a scrap of paper. "I'm sorry." It read simply, before ending abruptly. No explanation followed, no indication of where she intended to go or why she left. For years, the Whitmores assumed she had abandoned her post, choosing freedom over servitude. But now, faced with the grim reality of her fate, they realized the truth might be far more sinister. That night, under the cover of darkness, Sheriff Hale returned to the creek alone. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silvery beams across the rippling water. Fireflies danced lazily in the humid air, their tiny lights flickering like stars fallen to earth. Perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the stream, Hale pondered the events unfolding around him. Each new discovery seemed to raise more questions than answers. It was then, as he sat lost in thought, that he heard it, the faintest whisper carried by the wind. Startled, he glanced around, half expecting to see another ghostly figure emerging from the shadows. Instead, he spotted something unusual lying partially submerged near the bank of the creek. Intrigued, he climbed down carefully, his movements slow and deliberate. What he found buried beneath layers of mud and algae sent shockwaves through his system. It was a locket, small, delicate, and engraved with intricate patterns along its edges. Opening it revealed a photograph inside, two smiling faces gazing back at him, one belonging to the woman from the creek, the other unfamiliar, yet eerily familiar. Clutching the locket tightly, Hale felt the pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place. The twist awaited him, hidden in plain sight, waiting to reveal itself when the time was right. And though the journey ahead promised danger and uncertainty, he knew he must follow the trail wherever it led. Until the truth was uncovered, the spirit of the woman in the creek would continue to cry out for justice. The locket clutched in Hale's hand fell heavier than it should have, as though the secrets it held were pressing down on him in an almost physical weight. The photograph inside was a clue, a fragile thread that might unravel the tangled web of lies surrounding Abigail's death. He stared at the unfamiliar face beside hers, searching for any hint of recognition. It was a man, younger than he had expected, with sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to stare straight through the lens. Little did Hale know, this image would soon become the key to unlocking truths buried deeper than anyone could imagine. Back at the sheriff's office, Hale lit a lantern, its warm glow illuminating the small room filled with dusty files and faded wanted posters. He placed the locket carefully on his desk, studying it under the dim light. Etched along the edge of the metal casing were initials. A.M., not Abigail, but someone else entirely. His mind raced with possibilities. Who was A.M., and why had their lives intersected so tragically? Deputy Monroe arrived shortly after, her boots clicking softly against the wooden floorboards. She noticed the locket immediately, her brow furrowing as she leaned closer to examine it. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "In the creek," Hale replied, recounting his discovery. It was buried near where the body washed ashore. Monroe picked up the locket gently, turning it over in her hands. "These initials, they don't belong to Abigail," she observed. "Do you think it belonged to whoever took this picture?" Hale nodded slowly. "It's possible. But if that's true, then we're dealing with more than just a runaway servant. There's someone else involved here, someone who knew her well enough to carry this keepsake." Their investigation shifted gears as they delved further into the Whitmore family's past. They interviewed former employees, piecing together fragments of information about Abigail's life before her disappearance. What emerged was a portrait of a woman caught between duty and desire, a quiet rebellion simmering beneath the surface of her seemingly obedient demeanor. One former ranch hand, a wiry man named Jake Tanner, revealed something startling during their conversation. Abigail wasn't happy here, he admitted, glancing nervously over his shoulder as though afraid of being overheard. She used to talk about leaving, about starting fresh somewhere else, but there was someone holding her back. "Who?" Hale pressed, leaning forward intently. Tanner hesitated, clearly reluctant to divulge more. "I shouldn't say," he muttered, "but if you ask me, it wasn't just the Whitmores keeping her tied down." This revelation sent Hale and Monroe back to the Whitmore ranch, determined to confront the family once again. This time, however, they approached not as mere investigators, but as hunters closing in on their prey. As they rode toward the sprawling estate, the air grew thick with anticipation, charged with the promise of answers and perhaps danger. Upon arrival, they found the Whitmores gathered in the parlor, their usual confidence faltering under the weight of mounting suspicion. Mrs. Whitmore sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, her hands trembling as she clasped her teacup. Her husband paced restlessly behind her, his broad frame casting long shadows across the room. When Hale presented the locket, both reacted instantly, though their responses couldn't have been more different. Mrs. Whitmore gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. That's Marcus's locket," she exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, God, what have we done?" Whitmore spun around sharply, his face contorted with anger. "What are you talking about, woman? That trinket has nothing to do with us." But Hale saw the crack forming in the facade. "Marcus?" he repeated, his voice steady despite the storm brewing within him. "Is that the person in the photograph?" Mrs. Whitmore nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "He was our son, our only child. He disappeared years ago, just like Abigail. We always thought he ran away, chased by demons of his own making. But now," her voice trailed off, choked with emotion. Whitmore slammed his fist against the wall, his rage boiling over. "Enough! None of this matters anymore. Let the dead bury the dead." Yet Hale refused to let the matter rest. Driven by a growing sense of urgency, he pressed further, uncovering layers of deceit hidden beneath the surface of the Whitmore family's polished exterior. It became clear that Marcus Whitmore and Abigail had shared more than just a fleeting connection. They had been lovers, bound together by dreams of escape and freedom. Their relationship had been forbidden, a scandal waiting to erupt within the confines of the rigid social order governing the ranch. But their love had ended violently, cut short by forces beyond their control. And as Hale dug deeper, he uncovered evidence pointing to betrayal, not from outsiders, but from within the very family that claimed to mourn them both. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of red and gold, Hale stood alone atop a hill overlooking the Whitmore property. In his pocket, the locket weighed heavily, its secrets finally beginning to surface. Below him, the ranch bustled with activity, unaware of the storm gathering above. Yet Hale knew the truth would not remain hidden for long. Until justice was served, the cries of the forgotten would echo through the wilderness, haunting all who dared to listen. The night air carried a chill that seeped into Hale's bones as he stood atop the hill, his thoughts swirling with the weight of what he had uncovered. The Whitmore family's secrets were unraveling faster than anyone could have anticipated, and the threads led to places darker and more complex than he had imagined. Marcus Whitmore, the prodigal son, and Abigail, the servant girl, two lives intertwined in a forbidden romance that ended in tragedy. But the question lingered, who among them bore responsibility for their deaths? Hale descended from the hill, his boots crunching softly against the dry earth. He made his way back to the ranch, where lights flickered in the windows like beacons calling him closer. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The Whitmores gathered uneasily in the parlor. Mrs. Whitmore sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly together, while Mr. Whitmore paced back and forth, his jaw clenched. "You've been keeping things from us," Hale began, his voice firm but measured. "Things about your son Marcus and about Abigail. It's time you told me everything." Mr. Whitmore stopped pacing, his face darkening with anger. "We've already said too much," he growled. "What good will come of dragging up old wounds?" "Until we know the truth," Hale countered. "Those wounds won't heal. They'll fester, poisoning everything around them." Mrs. Whitmore looked up then, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He wasn't always a good boy. He was wild, reckless. When he fell for Abigail, it tore our family apart. We tried to stop them, to keep them separate, but they were so determined." "Determined enough to run away together," Hale suggested. "Yes," Mrs. Whitmore admitted, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They planned to leave, to start a new life somewhere no one would find them. But someone found out." Hale felt a shiver run down his spine. "Who?" Mr. Whitmore stepped forward, his expression grim. "One of the ranch hands, a man named Calvin Grayson. He saw Marcus sneaking around at night, meeting with Abigail. He reported it to me, thinking he was doing the right thing." "And what did you do?" Hale asked, his tone sharp. "I confronted Marcus," Mr. Whitmore replied, his voice heavy with regret. "I told him he couldn't disgrace the family name like that. I warned him there would be consequences if he didn't end things with Abigail. But you didn't stop there, did you?" Hale pressed. "You let Calvin take matters into his own hands." Mr. Whitmore flinched, as though struck by the accusation. Calvin swore he wouldn't hurt them, that he just wanted to scare them straight. But his voice trailed off, guilt etched deeply into his features. Little did they know, Calvin Grayson's actions had spiraled far beyond mere intimidation. Hale remembered the stories he had heard about Calvin. How the man had a reputation for violence, a short temper, and a penchant for solving problems with his fists. If Calvin had truly discovered Marcus and Abigail's plans, it was entirely possible he had taken drastic measures to ensure they never left the ranch. Dawn broke over the horizon as Hale rode out to find Calvin Grayson. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The ranch hand lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, its weatherboards creaking in the morning breeze. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, signaling that Grayson was likely inside. Hale dismounted and approached the cabin cautiously, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. Knocking twice, he waited for a response. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Calvin Grayson himself, a burly man with unkempt hair and a scowl etched onto his face. "What is it, Sheriff?" Grayson barked, clearly unamused by the interruption. "I need to ask you some questions," Hale said evenly, "about Marcus Whitmore and Abigail." Grayson's demeanor shifted instantly, his scowl deepening. "I don't know anything about that," he snapped. "Now leave me alone." But Hale wasn't deterred. Pushing past Grayson, he entered the cabin, his eyes scanning the sparse furnishings. On a table near the window, he noticed a scrap of fabric, blood-stained and torn. Picking it up, he held it out for Grayson to see. "This look familiar?" Hale asked, his voice low and dangerous. Grayson hesitated, his gaze darting nervously between Hale and the fabric. I don't know where that came from," he stammered. "Don't lie to me," Hale warned. "I know you were involved in what happened to Marcus and Abigail. Now tell me the truth, or I'll drag it out of you myself." Under the pressure, Grayson crumbled. Confessing in halting, broken sentences, he revealed how he had followed Marcus and Abigail one night, catching them packing supplies for their escape. Enraged and driven by jealousy, he had attacked them both, leaving them for dead in the woods. Abigail had succumbed to her injuries, but Marcus had managed to flee, disappearing into the wilderness. Hale listened in stunned silence, the gravity of Grayson's confession weighing heavily on him. 2 lives lost, not to fate, but to the cruelty and greed of those around them. As he handcuffed Grayson and prepared to escort him back to town, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Back at the Whitmore Ranch, the family awaited news of Hale's findings. When he returned with Grayson in tow, the shock was palpable. Mrs. Whitmore cried openly, her grief overwhelming, while Mr. Whitmore stared blankly ahead, as though unable to process the betrayal. But the story wasn't finished yet. Marcus Whitmore's disappearance remained unresolved, and Hale vowed to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. Little did he know, the answers lay buried deeper than anyone dared to imagine, hidden beneath layers of lies and deceit that stretched far beyond the borders of the Whitmore Ranch. Until the truth came to light, the cries of forgotten would continue to echo through the wilderness, haunting all who dared to listen. The days that followed were a blur of investigation and introspection for Sheriff Hale. The confession from Calvin Grayson had provided answers to some of the questions surrounding Abigail's death, but Marcus Whitmore's fate remained shrouded in mystery. Grayson claimed that Marcus had escaped after the attack, bleeding and battered, disappearing into the unforgiving wilderness. But where had he gone? And was it possible he was still alive? Hale returned to the creek, the place where Abigail's body had been found, searching for any signs that might point to Marcus's whereabouts. The water flowed as calmly as ever, its surface shimmering under the golden light of the afternoon sun. Yet beneath the tranquility lay secrets waiting to be uncovered. Kneeling by the bank, Hale noticed something unusual. A faint trail of scuff marks leading away from the water's edge and into the dense thicket beyond. His heart quickened as he followed the trail, his boots crunching softly against the underbrush. The path twisted and turned, eventually leading him to a small clearing where an old campsite lay hidden among the trees. The remnants of a fire pit were still visible, surrounded by charred sticks and bits of ash. Nearby, he discovered a discarded piece of clothing, torn and blood-stained, bearing the unmistakable crest of the Whitmore family embroidered onto its fabric. This was no ordinary campsite. It belonged to Marcus Whitmore. But why had Marcus stayed here? Had he lingered near the creek, hoping to find Abigail, or had he been too weak to venture farther? And if he had survived the initial attack, what had become of him afterward? As Hale stood amidst the ruins of the camp, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with the faintest whisper sound. At first, he thought it was merely the rustling of leaves, but then he realized it was a voice, a cry for help, barely audible but unmistakably human. Help, me? Heart pounding. Hale spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his revolver. The voice came again, softer this time, almost lost in the breeze. Following the sound, he pushed deeper into the woods, his senses on high alert. After several minutes of navigating through thickets and fallen branches, he stumbled upon a sight that made his blood run cold. Buried beneath a pile of moss and decaying leaves was a makeshift grave, crudely marked with a wooden cross. Etched into the wood were the words, Marcus Whitmore. Hale knelt beside it, his fingers brushing away the debris to reveal more details. The grave appeared fresh, as though dug recently, yet there was no sign of who had placed it there. Little did Hale know this discovery would lead him to uncover a truth far darker than he could have imagined. Back at the sheriff's office, Hale spent hours poring over maps and records, trying to piece together the events leading up to Marcus's death. He spoke with townsfolk, ranch hands, and even travelers passing through Blackwater Crossing, desperate for any clue that might shed light on the final days of the Whitmore heir. Most people offered little more than speculation, but one name kept surfacing repeatedly, Dr. Eleanor Carter. Dr. Carter was a reclusive figure in the community, known for her unconventional methods and mysterious past. She lived alone in a cabin nestled deep within the forest, rarely venturing into town unless absolutely necessary. Some whispered she possessed knowledge beyond the ordinary, while others dismissed her as a mere quack. Regardless, Hale decided she was worth investigating. Riding out to her cabin at dawn, Hale approached cautiously, wary of the eerie silence enveloping the area. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, indicating someone was home. Knocking twice, he waited patiently until the door creaked open, revealing Dr. Carter herself, a tall woman with piercing green eyes and silver-streaked hair tied loosely behind her head. "Sheriff," she greeted, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. What brings you to my neck of the woods?" "I'm looking into the matter of Marcus Whitmore," Hale explained, choosing his words carefully. "I understand you may have treated him before his disappearance." Dr. Carter's expression shifted slightly, her gaze hardening. "Come inside," she said simply, stepping aside to allow him entry. Her cabin was modest but well-kept, filled with shelves lined with jars and bottles containing strange concoctions. In the corner stood a small cot, covered with blankets that looked as though they hadn't been disturbed in weeks. Hale noticed immediately that something about the space felt off, too quiet, too still. "Marcus came to me shortly after the attack," Dr. Carter began, breaking the silence. "He was badly injured, barely conscious. I did what I could to stabilize him, but his wounds were severe. He knew he wouldn't survive long." Hale frowned. "So you buried him?" "No," Dr. Carter replied, her voice firm. "I didn't bury him because he didn't die. Not then, anyway." "What do you mean?" Hale asked, his confusion growing. Dr. Carter hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the window as though seeking an escape. "There are things you don't understand about Marcus Whitmore," she said finally. "Things no one else knows, not even his parents. When he came to me that night, he wasn't just running from Calvin Grayson. He was running from something much worse." "Worse?" Hale echoed, leaning forward intently. Dr. Carter took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she recounted the tale. Marcus, she revealed, had been involved in dealings far darker than anyone suspected. He had dabbled in forbidden practices, experimenting with potions and rituals meant to grant power or immortality. His obsession had driven him to make deals with dangerous individuals, men whose names struck fear into the hearts of even the toughest outlaws. One of those men betrayed him. Dr. Carter continued. They tracked him down, demanding payment for services rendered. Marcus fought them off, but not without sustaining grievous injuries. That night, when he sought refuge with me, he begged me to hide his true nature from the world. He feared what would happen if the truth came to light. Hale sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation. Marcus Whitmore, the rebellious son, the lover of Abigail, had been hiding a secret life steeped in danger and deceit. But if Marcus hadn't died immediately after the attack, where was he now? And why had someone buried a grave marked with his name? Before Hale could ask further questions, Dr. Carter gestured toward the cot in the corner. "Look there," she said quietly. Hale approached cautiously, pulling back the blanket to reveal a shocking sight. Beneath the covers lay a journal, its leather cover worn and cracked with age. Opening it, he found pages filled with cryptic writings, sketches of symbols, and detailed accounts of experiments gone wrong. Among the entries was one final note, written hastily in shaky handwriting. Asterisk, "They will come for me soon. If you find this, remember my sins and forgive them. Forgive me, Abigail." Asterisk. Hale closed the journal slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, yet new questions arose with each answer. Who were they? And why had Marcus believed they would return? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest, Hale realized the story of the Whitmore family was far from over. Until every secret was unearthed, the cries of the forgotten would continue to echo through the wilderness, haunting all who dare to listen.